The Fifth Element was never meant to make sense. It wasn't born as a movie, but as an escape. A place a lonely teenager built inside his head long before Hollywood cared. What eventually exploded onto the screen looked like sci-fi madness, flying taxis, alien opera, fluorescent chaos. But behind that spectacle was a production held together by obsession, personal collapse, and creative risk. The script took decades to finish. The hero and the villain never shared a single scene. Real explosions were triggered indoors. Actors fainted inside costumes. And while the universe on screen was being saved, a marriage was quietly falling apart behind the camera. This film didn't survive because it followed rules. It survived because it ignored them. These are the numbers behind The Fifth Element. And buried inside them is the reason this movie refused to disappear. Number 1. Long before flying taxis and laser rifles filled the screen, The Fifth Element existed as a private refuge. Luc Besson began writing it at just 16 years old, growing up isolated in a small village in France. There was no film industry around him, no creative circle, no clear path forward. What he had instead was time, imagination, and a need to disappear into something larger than himself. The story didn't begin as a movie concept, it began as a universe, a place where loneliness could be reorganized into meaning. Characters like Lilu, Zorg, and the ancient Mondashawans were not designed for an audience yet. They were anchors. Besson returned to this world again and again over the years, expanding it as his life changed, refining it as his skills grew. By the time cameras finally rolled, more than 2 decades had passed. What audiences saw on screen was not a sudden burst of creativity, but the fossilized remains of a teenage escape that never stopped evolving. Number 2. Besson didn't just write a script, he built an entire mythology and then dismantled most of it. The earliest version of The Fifth Element wasn't even a screenplay. It was a massive, galaxy-spanning epic exceeding 400 pages. It was designed as a trilogy, complete with political systems, alien religions, interplanetary conflicts, and civilizations that never made it anywhere near the final cut. Entire storylines were sacrificed, characters with detailed backstories were reduced to background figures, whole planets vanished. What survived was only the central spine of the narrative, compressed into a single film. Studio pressure forced Besson to choose restraint over indulgence, clarity over scale. The movie audiences know today is just the visible slice of something far larger, a fragment of a universe that still exists only in notebooks and memory. What feels dense on screen is actually a minimalist version of a much bigger dream. Number 3. Even after the script was finalized, the future of the film was still unstable. Corbin Dallas almost had a different face. Before Bruce Willis signed on, the studio strongly considered Mel Gibson, fresh off massive box office success. On paper, it made sense. But Besson hesitated. Gibson brought intensity and gravity, but not lightness. The role required someone who could move through chaos without being consumed by it. When Willis agreed, the tone of the character shifted instantly. Corbin Dallas became less of a traditional action hero and more of a reluctant survivor, armed with dry humor, exhaustion, and bad luck. The performance grounded the absurdity instead of fighting it. With Willis, the film gained elasticity. It could be loud without collapsing, strange without becoming cold. One casting decision quietly reshaped the emotional balance of the entire story. Number 4. Gary Oldman never chased the role of Zorg. He didn't audition. He didn't lobby. He barely even tried to understand the film. He accepted the part as a favor to Luc Besson, who had previously supported Oldman's deeply personal project Nil by Mouth. When Besson called, Oldman said yes almost immediately, without studying the script in depth. Privately, he admitted later that he had no idea what kind of movie this was supposed to be. The tone confused him. The world felt excessive, cartoonish, unreal. But once on set, he committed fully. Hidden behind asymmetrical plastic armor and a distorted haircut, Oldman leaned into exaggeration. Zorg became a fusion of corporate menace and absurdity, a villain who felt both ridiculous and threatening. Oldman may not have believed in the story, but that distance helped shape one of the strangest antagonists in 1990s science fiction. Number 5. Casting Lilu was the most exhaustive search of the entire production. More than 8,000 actresses auditioned. Some were well-known, others were complete unknowns. Many performed with confidence, polish, and technical precision, but none of them felt unfamiliar enough. Besson wasn't looking for skill alone. He was looking for someone who didn't seem fully anchored to any country, culture, or time. When Mila Jovovich walked into the room, the search ended almost instantly. She didn't dominate the space. She didn't overperform. There was something neutral about her presence, something unreadable. Besson later described it as the feeling that she wasn't from anywhere in particular. That was the point. Lilu needed to feel assembled, not raised, innocent, but not naive. Mila didn't wear the role, she inhabited it. Out of thousands of choices, she felt like the only one who didn't belong on Earth. Number 6. While Lilu was becoming the emotional center of the film, another figure stood quietly in its shadow. The alien diva Plava Laguna, whose performance would unlock the fate of the universe, was played by Luc Besson's wife at the time. Covered in layers of blue makeup and prosthetics, she was almost unrecognizable on screen. Her movements were controlled, her presence was ethereal, her role was brief but pivotal. Behind the camera, the dynamic was far more complicated. As production continued, Besson grew increasingly close to Mila Jovovich. What began as collaboration slowly turned personal. By the time filming ended, his marriage had dissolved and his relationship with Mila had become public. No scandal erupted, but the shift was unmistakable. Two women defined the soul of the film, one as a symbol of sacrifice, the other as a new beginning. The contrast never needed dialogue. It was already written into the silence between scenes. Number 7. Lilu didn't just arrive with a costume and a hairstyle, she arrived with her own language. While developing the script, Luc Besson created a complete alien tongue known as the divine language, containing hundreds of structured words and grammatical rules. It wasn't designed as decorative sound. It was meant to function. Mila Jovovich learned it phonetically at first, then fluently. As filming progressed, the language moved beyond the script. Besson and Jovovich began using it off-camera, writing notes and messages no one else could understand. It became a private system, a shared space inside an already sealed production. When Lilu speaks on screen, every word is intentional. What sounds abstract is precise, rehearsed, and deeply personal. The language didn't just build the world, it sealed a relationship inside it. Number 8. Lilu's physicality was not simulated. Mila Jovovich insisted on performing the majority of her action sequences herself. That decision reshaped how the character moved. Her fight scenes were fast, raw, and imperfect. The iconic corridor battle, where Lilu dismantles armed guards with brutal efficiency, was not constructed through digital tricks or rapid editing. It was repetition, exhaustion, and impact. Wire work, combat training, and countless takes pushed her body beyond comfort. Bruises were expected, mistakes were absorbed. The character's power came not from invincibility, but from momentum. Lilu fought like something newly born and dangerously unrestrained. That physical authenticity gave the film its emotional credibility. The ultimate weapon in the story had to feel vulnerable, or the myth collapsed. Number 9. The danger on set was not metaphorical. Some of it was mechanical. Zorg's multifunction weapon was not entirely fake. One of its components, a flamethrower attachment, was fully operational. During a test, a blast of fire climbed too high and licked across the ceiling. Crew members scrambled, fire extinguishers were deployed, filming stopped. No one was seriously injured, but the warning was clear. This was a production willing to cross safety lines in pursuit of realism. Explosions would be practical, weapons would be heavy, sets would be pushed to their limits. The fifth element wasn't just pretending to be dangerous, it was flirting with it. Number 10. The ancient Mondoshawans didn't move slowly for dramatic effect. They moved slowly because they were suffering. Each performer inside those massive alien suits carried nearly 80 pounds of foam, latex, and internal structure. Ventilation was minimal. Cooling systems didn't exist. Under the studio lights, the temperature inside the costumes rose fast. One actor collapsed from heat exhaustion during filming and had to be pulled out mid-scene. Water, oxygen, and medical staff followed. Production paused, then resumed. What appears on screen as solemn, ceremonial movement is actually endurance. Every step was calculated, not for performance, but for survival. The film's opening sequence looks ancient and deliberate because the people inside the suits were fighting their own limits. Number 11. Ruby Road looked effortless on screen, but nothing about the role was comfortable. Jean-Paul Gaultier's costume weighed over 50 pounds and was built with a rigid spine that restricted movement almost entirely. Chris Tucker couldn't sit down. He couldn't bend forward. Between takes, he leaned against walls or stood motionless, conserving energy. The character was designed to overwhelm, and the costume enforced it. Originally, the role had been written for Prince, whose androgynous presence inspired Ruby's identity. Prince liked the script, but when he saw the wardrobe, he walked away. It was too extreme, too exposed. Tucker took the role instead and transformed it into something louder, faster, and more frantic. The performance became unforgettable, not because it was easy, but because it was endured. Number 12. Most films simulate destruction. The Fifth Element detonated it. When the opera house sequence erupts into chaos, the explosion was real, not a miniature, not a digital composite. It was a full-scale indoor blast, carefully engineered and executed in one take. At the time, it became the largest interior explosion ever captured on film. Dozens of cameras were placed around the set. There were no second chances. Fire marshals stood by. Structural elements were designed to collapse on cue. When the charge went off, the destruction unfolded exactly once. What audiences see is not illusion. It is controlled catastrophe, preserved permanently because repeating it was impossible. Number 13. Corbin Dallas and Zorg never meet. Not in a hallway. Not in a showdown, not even by accident. This wasn't a scheduling issue or an oversight. It was a deliberate narrative decision. Luc Besson wanted the hero and the villain to exist on parallel tracks, affecting each other only through consequences. Their actions ripple across the same world without direct confrontation. Destruction happens because of timing, not rivalry. This choice stripped the story of a traditional climax and replaced it with inevitability. The threat doesn't come from a face-to-face battle, but from absence. The enemy is never seen coming, and that tension lingers longer than any final fight. Number 14. Science fiction usually hides in darkness. Besson rejected that instinct. He believed the future wouldn't be shadowed, it would be exposed. So he lit his world aggressively. Daylight taxi chases, white corridors, bright skies filled with flying traffic. Every costume, every prop, every effect was forced into full view. This decision carried risk. Bright light reveals flaws. It leaves no room for illusion. But that was the point. Besson wanted a future that felt crowded, loud, and alive. By breaking one of the genre's oldest rules, he redefined its visual language. The Fifth Element didn't ask audiences to imagine the future in the dark. It forced them to look directly at it. Number 15. Before Ruby Road screamed his way into cult history, the role belonged to someone else, Prince. Besson envisioned Ruby as a genderless icon, seductive, unpredictable, and untouchable. Prince fit that vision perfectly. He agreed to meet. He liked the character. He even accepted the role. Then he saw the costumes, lace, mesh, heels, silhouettes that erased boundaries entirely. For someone who had already redefined gender expression, it was somehow too far. Prince walked away. Chris Tucker stepped in and took the character in a different direction. Less mystique, more velocity. Ruby became chaos incarnate, but the original intention never disappeared. The character still carries the ghost of what might have been. Number 16. When The Fifth Element premiered, it was supposed to be a triumph. It was the most expensive film ever produced in France, a bold fusion of science fiction, fashion, opera, and spectacle. Instead, the first reactions were brutal. At Cannes, the film was met with boos. Critics dismissed it as loud, shallow, and incoherent. The tone confused them. The humor felt excessive. The world seemed undisciplined. But audiences responded differently. Younger viewers, in particular, didn't care about structure or logic. They remembered the colors, the music, the characters. They quoted Ruby Road. They replayed the opera sequence. What critics rejected, fans embraced. Over time, the initial backlash faded, replaced by something stronger and more durable. The film didn't recover by explaining itself. It survived by being unforgettable. Number 17. Most science fiction films design uniforms. The Fifth Element designed civilizations. Luc Besson wanted every character, even those passing through the frame for seconds, to feel intentional. He brought in Jean-Paul Gaultier, not to decorate the film, but to define it. Gaultier created more than 1,000 costumes, each tied to a specific culture, function, and hierarchy. No two groups looked alike. Flight attendants wore sculpted uniforms that felt both erotic and clinical. Taxi drivers dressed like urban survivors. Soldiers looked more like nightclub enforcers than military units. Clothing replaced exposition. You didn't need to be told who belonged where. You could see it instantly. The world wasn't explained, it was worn. Number 18. Even the film's futuristic designs were anchored in ancient belief. The Mondo Shawan ships weren't sleek or mechanical. They were monumental. Their shapes were inspired by Egyptian architecture, heavy bases and rounded tops, echoing temples and pyramids. Besson wanted the future to feel old, as if advanced civilizations had always existed, watching silently. This visual choice tied science fiction to mythology. Technology didn't replace faith, it absorbed it. The implication was subtle but powerful. Progress didn't erase the past, it carried it forward. In The Fifth Element, even the spaceships held memory. Number 19. The future cityscapes of The Fifth Element looked digital, but much of them were built by hand. Before computer graphics could carry entire worlds, the production relied on detailed miniature models. Towering skyscrapers, layered traffic lanes, and dense urban blocks were constructed physically, then filmed with motion control cameras. Digital effects were added later, not to replace reality, but to extend it. The result was a city that felt tangible. Cars didn't float through empty space. They moved through weight and density. The future had texture. This blend of practical craftsmanship and early digital work gave the film a visual depth that still holds up decades later, precisely because it was rooted in something real. Number 20. Despite its distinctly European vision, The Fifth Element was filmed entirely in English. This wasn't an artistic choice. It was a survival strategy. Luc Besson understood that a film this strange, this expensive, and this personal needed global reach to exist at all. English was the entry point. American stars were cast, British crews were hired, production moved to Pinewood Studios in London. At the time, it was an unprecedented gamble for a French-funded film. But without that decision, the project would likely have collapsed under its own ambition. To speak to the world, the film had to speak its language. The Fifth Element was never polished, it was never restrained, it didn't follow logic, and it didn't ask permission. Critics tried to bury it. Time refused. What remained was not perfection, but identity. A movie built from isolation, obsession, risk, and contradiction. A universe stitched together by imagination that wouldn't stay quiet. It didn't succeed because it made sense. It succeeded because it was unmistakably itself. And that is why, decades later, it's still here.